Welcome to this Introduction to Textiles video. In this video we're going to be going through how to do a stitch sampler that looks like this. We're going to be going through how to do straight stitches and set up a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. We're going to do some rows of zigzag. We're going to learn how to pivot, and we're also going to learn how to sew over a curve. First thing you want to do is fold your fabric in half. You want to just press that fold in, and then you want to cut along that fold with the scissors nice and flat, pressing the bottom blade into the fold. Alright, the first thing you want to do is just make sure that your sewing machine is set up correctly. So we want to have the tension control to be on number 5, where the red line matches up. We want our pattern stitch to be on the green side, which connects to down here, on the straight and zigzag side. We want our stitch width to be on a 0 to give us a straight line. We want our buttonhole knob to be on 0 as well, because we're not doing a buttonhole. And we want our stitch length to be 2.5 to 3. And we want to make sure that our feed teeth will pass our fabric through our machine. So once we have cut our fabric in half, we are ready to sew. And what we need to make sure of is our threads are at the back. We put our fabric in the machine at the very top of the fabric, and we want to also make sure that we are setting up our fabric along this second line here on this plate. That will give us a straight stitch with a seam allowance of 1.5 centimeters, so provided that our needle is in the middle position and our fabric is lined up along the second line here, that measurement will automatically give us the correct amount of seam allowance, which is 1.5 centimeters. So we want to turn on the machine, and only right before we start sewing. We want to hold our fabric to steer with our right hand and our left hand to just allow the fabric to move through the machine. So we're going to get started sewing. So we're going to do a straight stitch and a reverse stitch and a straight stitch all the way to the bottom of the fabric. Reverse again, which is called back stitch, and forward again just to lock that stitch in. So we're going to go forward a few stitches, we're going to reverse a few stitches, and we also need to make sure our threads are to the back. We're going to go forward a straight stitch all the way to the end. Following that second line, making sure that our fabric is also even and lined up, and all the way to the bottom of the fabric, and then we go into reverse again and then forward again, and that is called a back stitch, which makes a very strong stitch. And then we cut our threads. Get into the habit of cutting your threads all the way back as you go to keep nice, neat. Second row of stitching we're going to be doing is a zigzag stitch, and what we need to do is we are doing a medium size zigzag. So we are going to change the stitch width knob to the number 3. We are also going to turn the length of the stitch to number 3. And what I'm going to do to get nice parallel even lines is to run the edge of my presser foot up against the edge of the first row of stitching that I've done. So I'm going to start at the very top of the fabric. I'm not going to do any back stitching with this or any other stitches for this stitch sampler. And we're just going to go from the top of the fabric down to the bottom of the fabric. The next row of stitches we are going to do is a large zigzag. So we're going to change the stitch width to a setting of 5 and the stitch length to a setting of 5. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to run the edge of the presser foot up against the top of the zigzag. Remember to cut your threads to keep your projects nice and neat. Also make sure your threads are to the back and not tangled. The next row of stitching we are going to be doing is a straight stitch again, but we're going to be incorporating some pivoting in that. So this is a little bit of a confusing task to do, but we'll just set the settings to 0 for a straight stitch again for the stitch width, and back to 2.5 for the stitch length. And we're going to go forward. We're going to put the needle into the fabric using the hand wheel. We're going to put the presser foot up, turn the fabric around in the direction that you want to go, so we're always going to be going forwards towards you. So we're going to do a few stitches forward. We're going to turn or pivot the fabric around again, and then we're going to sew forward again. You need to make sure that the needle is in the fabric to get nice neat corners. And it's going to cut through. I'll use the to it. Our last stitch on our stitch sampler is our curve, and we've drawn that on with our tailor's chalk. We're just doing a straight stitch, so our settings are 0 and 2.5 for our stitch length. Tip to remember, if you've got a presser foot with this little line on it here, that line lines up with your needle if your needle is in the middle position. So all you need to do this well is to line up that line with your drawn line, and you should be good. Our first stitch sampler is complete. We have a straight stitch with a back stitch at the start and at the end. We have a medium zigzag, which is a setting of 3 and 3. We have a large zigzag, which is a setting of 5 and 5. We have a straight stitch with pivoting, which is back to 0 and 2.5. And the last stitch is just sewing over a curved line that you've drawn onto the fabric. That's also a 0 and 2.5